I think there's such a difference between blame and sort of acknowledgement. I'm not blaming you for the decisions that you've made or maybe the way that you've been a parent, because at the end of the day, a lot of times parents really are just doing the best they can and the only thing they know how to do. But we also have to acknowledge that this did have an effect on your child. I think the other objections I receive are like, if you just snap out of it, if you just, you're being oversensitive, if you just kind of don't think about it, it's going to go away. And I really have to explain that years of trying not to think about it is what causes the depression. Right. Depress literally means to push down. And that is what someone has been doing for years. And so it's not working. And I think there's still going to be a lot of people who are very stuck on that mentality. And unfortunately, I have to accept that. But if I can really talk about, for me, what it did and for what it does for so many people to actually start releasing these things, that it's not something that, you know, your emotions are not going to destroy you and sort of overtake you. It's actually going to help you manage them in the process.
Welcome to the Improving Humans podcast, where improving humans share their stories, experiences, and lessons to help other humans improve. Today I'm joined by Dr. Sarika Agarwal. As a recent doctoral intern at Rutgers University and a national mental health public speaker, you've dedicated both your career professional life, but also your personal time to talk to people about mental health, get them to get a better understanding and help them navigate some of the intricacies that are involved. And I know a lot of that is fueled by some of your own personal experiences with mental illness and overcoming that and basically using the tools that you've learned to help other people in both your career again and public speaking. So it's really cool that you're sitting down with me today. It means a lot to me, and I'm so grateful that we're getting to talk.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So when I was putting together interview questions for this, I had a sudden realization as I was about halfway through, which was there is a world or a timeline in which this interview doesn't happen. And I say that because I know that at one point things had gotten difficult and you were potentially about to end your life. And I think that's a pretty stark reminder of some of the seriousness around mental illness and what the future holds for some people who are battling with this. So if you don't mind talking about it, I would love to learn and get an understanding of the circumstances that led up to that moment, like what had happened as far back as you want to go of leading you to that moment where you were going to make that decision.
Absolutely. So it really started as young as I can remember. I was subject to a lot of physical and emotional abuse in my childhood. And as children, we don't really have the ability to understand, mommy's just having a bad day or daddy's going through something at work. We internalize that as, oh, there's something wrong with me. And I think that I just grew up for a very, very long time believing that something is wrong with me and I am bad and I can't do anything about that because it's me. It's not something that I can change. And as I went through school, that messaging, because kids are mean, that messaging kind of was said to me again and again of, you are bad and sort of there's something wrong with you. And I would just feel this pain that I really will never really be able to explain. I'm very thankful that I don't remember what that felt like. But in that moment, it just felt like that was a pain that was never going to end. I hated myself. I hated my circumstances. And I felt like no one loved me. And I felt like no one was ever going to love me. And I thought, well, if the people around you, such as your family who know you, even they can't love you, then you're not lovable. And I guess I just got to this point where the pain really overshadowed any of the joy that I think I thought I would ever feel or any of the joy that I felt, because I didn't really feel any. And I tried taking my own life.
Wow. And in that moment, is there, as you're leading up to that, I imagine when you're dealing with anything, especially when you're dealing with it by yourself, it's internalized, etc., you would, I imagine, want some sort of support system, but it seems like at that time you're reeling back and things are being internalized. Would you mind just talking about maybe the desire to potentially reach out to someone, and if you're not getting that conversation or recognition or really whatever it is of what you're feeling, what was that process like, that back and forth internally and then externally?
Yeah. So I actually started feeling very mentally ill. So my suicide attempt was around age 14. I started having signs of mental illness probably around age 8 or 9, but I was diagnosed at age 13.
Okay.
And my parents, especially my dad, really did make a very big effort to try to get me to feel better. But it was this rushed process. It was this process of, you need to feel better right away. And it's interesting because the more that you try to fix someone so quickly, the more it reminds them that they're broken. So although I was sort of reaching out for help, the type of help that I was receiving wasn't what I needed, because it was just enhancing that messaging that I already had, that there's something wrong with you.
And if you don't mind me asking, like, details about that rush process, because there may be some parents who are maybe trying to navigate their children's like mental health, and maybe they are also thinking about going into it rush. So to avoid those mistakes, like, what were some of the things, if you don't mind, like that?
Absolutely. Different therapist every single day.
Oh,
If the therapist didn't work one time, if I wasn't leaving that appointment feeling better, you had to go to a new one. I was on 7 different medications at one time, which now, being in this field, I realize is a horrific choice,
Yeah.
especially to a developing mind and to a teenager who was already having all these changes. And it was just this rushed process of, if it's not working now, it has to work. If it's not working, then there's something wrong with you, and you have to get better, and you have to get better. And I couldn't. I needed time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready.
Wow. And then once you get to that point of, like, you have your suicide attempt, if you don't mind just talking about the circumstances of that suicide attempt and some of the aftermath of what happened afterwards, like, how were you feeling? What was the reaction from other people? I mean, how did everything get discovered? Like, if you don't mind talking about it.
So it got discovered because I actually did disclose to a friend after I did attempt. So I was rushed to the hospital, and afterwards I was hospitalized for 7 days.
Wow.
And it was in a place where, you couldn't really go outside. You couldn't have certain things. You couldn't have people come visit you. Maybe like once a day my dad was able to come, but other than that, no one else was allowed to see me. And it was very difficult because in that moment, I didn't even really understand what was happening. I was so young, and I couldn't really wrap my head around what I had done. And there was also a part of me that still maybe didn't realize how much I needed help. Another thing about mental illness is sometimes very volatile. So I had that suicide attempt at a point which was so low, and then I was almost okay again, right? And it was like this very hard dynamic of really understanding the pain that I felt, because my brain almost didn't want to accept it.
Wow.
And then it actually, because I had told a friend what had happened, there was another friend who found out, and my whole school found out. And I was cyberbullied for it. People were telling me online, you should have succeeded, and why are you here? And it really led me to, even after that attempt, still feeling like I needed to hide what had happened. I thought after that attempt, looking back, that would be the thing that got me to really go into treatment for myself and realize that something was wrong, but I still wasn't ready yet.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And reflecting back on that moment, because that's obviously an extremely traumatic thing to go through, especially at that age when, your school life and the people that are around you publicly, I mean, you spend most of your time in that environment for a lot of it. So to be constantly surrounded by that is really tough. When you retrospectively look at that, do you think that was a product of maybe how society saw mental illness? Was that just kids not fully understanding the depth of, like, the fact that someone can be dealing with someone? It was an amalgamation of things. Like, what do you think attributed to the way they reacted?
I think it was all of those things, right? I think that there wasn't a lot of education about mental illness at that point. It's been so beautiful to see how much there is now, but people didn't really realize, and I don't think they understood the severity of their words. To other kids, it was just harmless, meaningless fun, or just poking on someone, but I don't think children understand the severity of what someone is actually feeling in that moment. And I also think there's been a couple of people who have actually reached out to me afterwards, like recently,
Wow.
who have apologized for the way that they treated me. And I think that oftentimes we, bully other people because we don't want to accept that that's actually something we're dealing with. So I think that was also an element of it as well.
That's a phenomenal point. So I think as you, move on, you go through high school and then you get into college. I mean, at what point are you starting to think maybe this is something that I'm able to start working through, developing the tools? Like, at what point do you start getting the tools to start properly, I guess I would say, like, dealing with this?
Yeah. So what really happened for me is, so I got accepted into NYU. I posted about it, and I was bullied for it. People said I didn't deserve to get in, and that I'm actually an idiot. I only got in because my parents could afford it. I know, it's crazy. And that was a really core moment for me, because it made me realize I actually can't depend on other people for my own happiness. This was the thing I thought was finally going to impress the people around me, and I was finally going to get that external validation that I wanted so badly, and I still didn't get it. And that's when I knew that something had to really change, because if I did this great thing and I still didn't get that acceptance, then I was never going to be happy.
Yeah.
So what I really started doing, and I didn't realize how much of a change this was actually going to be, I started doing things that made me feel good. You know, I joined like a poetry slam, I joined like a pets club, I joined things that I really liked, regardless of whether it was cool or not. And I actually started hanging out with a very different friend group. And what that did for me was two things. One, it made me realize that I could possibly feel good. I hadn't felt that type of joy or any joy in a really, really long time.
Yeah.
And so when I started engaging in activities that I actually liked and being with people that made me feel good, I realized, oh, wow, I could actually feel happy, but I don't, and I want to be happy. But I think the biggest part, and this took me a long time to realize, is being around those people made me realize I actually deserve to be happy.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that I did. And knowing those two things now, that one, happiness was out there, and two, that I deserved to have it, that was something that really allowed me to finally say, okay, I want to seek help and I want to go into therapy. So when I entered into NYU, then it's when I started therapy, and I was with that therapist for 7 years.
And was this something that you decided upon yourself, or were your parents still involved in trying to find you a therapist, or had you just done this like
This
on
was
your
of
own?
my own volition.
Nice,
I
okay.
think for a very long time, because I wasn't ready to get better, because I didn't think that I deserved to get better, I didn't really try. And when I would be in those therapy spaces, I wasn't listening to anything that anyone had said. But when I went to a therapist of my own volition and actually me wanting to do the work, that's when the change really happened.
That's amazing. And I would love to talk about, because I think the piece you talked about where you start joining these clubs, you start doing things you enjoy. There's an adage that I think a lot of us hear all the time, which is just be yourself, like be authentic to who you are. But I think I was trying to think of how to frame this, but I think a lot of times, especially if you're operating when you're trying to get other people's approval, you kind of even don't know who you are at a certain point, because I imagine you're just trying to do things that either you think other people will enjoy, or you're just copying what everyone's doing around you. So I would love to sort of dissect that process of, for anybody who maybe says like, yeah, I do want to be myself, but I don't even know where I'm supposed to start. Like, how did you go about starting figuring out who you even were, like what you authentically enjoyed doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that for me, there were a lot of things that I enjoyed when I was younger that I really shut off because of public opinion, because people said that was stupid, or, you know, you're a nerd, or whatever the hell that kids want to throw around.
Yeah.
And I think that part of trying to figure out who you are is, one, realizing the things that you used to enjoy at some point in your life that now you don't really engage in much. For me, those were things like puggles. Those were so for me, those were things like puzzles. Writing was a very big one. That was something I did when I was younger, and that I kind of shut myself off from. So I think it's starting to reconnect with certain passions. I also think it's really starting to put yourself out there and do things that maybe you never thought that you would do, that you never really, no one ever told you to do, and just kind of try it out. I think for me, I was so disconnected from my body for a very, very long time. And when I started to do things that I enjoyed and I started getting more in touch with my body, I could feel deep inside when I enjoyed something. You know,
Yeah.
I'd want to do it. I'd feel my mind be activated. I'd feel my heart feeling lighter. And those were kind of like, that was information for me that, okay, this is something that you really like. And I think that the question sometimes I ask myself too is, if no one was watching me do this, and if no one was around to validate me, would I still do this? And I think there's some things that I wouldn't, and there's also a lot of things that I would. And starting to fill my life with the ones that I would is really the way that I think I moved more towards being like authentic.
I love that. And before we get into sort of the, now you're going into school and you're professionally, you're going to be able to help people, is I kind of want to stop at like the point of like when you're dealing with now the community response to, I'm sure stories are spreading about what had happened to you, or, you know, things that spread in school, obviously. And I want to read a quote that I read in like the article that you did with Seema, where you said, when I told a family member about my mental illness, I was labeled as crazy. So the resulting embarrassment led me to stay silent for years, which I think particularly within the South Asian community, but you can experience this in other places. I don't think it's just constricted to mental illness, whether it's career stuff, whether it's just who you're dating, maybe even, and things like that. There's always conversations that happen around. If you wouldn't mind just talking about that experience of now you're dealing with not only internal turmoil that you're dealing with, but now you're having to face a community that's either trying to silence you or judge you, etc. Like, how did you stay sane as much as you could throughout that process to navigate that? Because sometimes it feels like you're one person versus your entire world at that point.
Yeah. So. I think that's something that I really had to define for myself was what I valued in this world, and really continue to act in line with those values. And I think so much of that also was starting to trust my inner voice, because I think that the thing that was really hard about people labeling me as crazy and trying to silence me is that I believed them, that I really am crazy and that I shouldn't be speaking about this. But when I was really able to start being in therapy and finding a lot more confidence in my inner voice, when people would say those things to me, I would say, well, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, my value, a very big one, is authenticity. And if I was going to start kind of being authentic, I knew that I was going to risk sort of the public opinion. But if I'm acting in line with my values, then the public opinion just doesn't bother me as much. And I also think that to realize really what's going on in the South Asian community that is making them act this way, so much of it is because these are things that they're dealing with themselves, that they see something in me that's triggering for them. Yeah. And when I was able to understand it more that way, it actually made me feel like I had even more of a responsibility to talk about these things. And I'm very happy that I'm doing it.
That's incredible. And in the same way that you talked about, you know, people from when you were in school reaching back out like, hey, I'm so sorry that I said those things, have people within the community as well, maybe not as publicly, but just at least reached out to you and potentially been like, you know what, like, we shouldn't have said that, or now my son's actually dealing with this, or my daughter's dealing with this. Like,
yes, absolutely. I actually had one of my dad's friends, he came up to me and he said, thank you for talking about this stuff because I can't. And I've had a lot of other individuals reach out to me and say they're now starting to, and, you know, older women too, like my mom's age, starting to really say, I'm starting to think about my own mental illness and what I've sort of experienced. And, you know, you're understanding the world in a way in which I wish I had understood. And especially with the public speaking, I thought that that was something that was going to be really frowned upon, but the reaction has really been the opposite. It's been, thank you for starting to sort of speak about these things. And I don't know, I just feel really grateful when I think about it, truthfully, that I'm at this point.
That's amazing. So you get into NYU, the reaction, you have that reaction, and then you realize at that point, you know, I need to start doing things for myself and being happy for me. So I think in terms of that, when at what point was it early on in that process that you realized, you know, I do want to go into psychology and like I actually want to start helping people? Was that immediate, or did you figure that out later? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah, so I think that I knew I wanted to go into psychology starting my junior year of high school. Okay. I took one psychology class, and at this point, I was very depressed. And so finding motivation to study or to kind of engage myself in academic things was not something that I did. Yeah. And when I took this psychology class, all of a sudden I was reading more and I was motivated and I was doing extra credit even when there was no real extra credit that she was going to give. And I was just like, but give me more to do. And I felt this spark in me that I hadn't felt in such a long time. And I knew that that was a career that I wanted to pursue. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I just knew that I wanted to continue studying it because it didn't feel like studying. For me, it just felt this, I don't know, like something was like being lit inside of me. Yeah. I never really will know how to explain it. It was a passion. It really was. And I knew that I wanted to make it into a career. I think that I knew that I wanted to be a psychologist and really be on the other side helping people is knowing the effect that therapy had on me. It completely changed my life, and it helped me understand the world in a way that I never thought I could. And it helped me feel free in a way that I never thought I could. And to be able to give that gift to other people is truly the most amazing way I could ever dedicate my life. So I knew that I do want to be, you know, studying psychology, and I want to be a psychologist and be able to kind of give therapy to people the way that it was given to me.
That's incredible. And I would love to learn about, so you have your therapist that you're going to for now extended number of years that you're able to dedicate towards and do the work. But you're also now in school learning about psychology. So I would love to learn, like, during the course curriculum, or maybe things professors had told you, maybe books you picked up along the way. Was there anything that maybe stuck with you or helped you outside of just the therapist you were going to, where you're like, wow, this actually makes me realize I was doing this one particular thing? Or were there improvements that were able to made for you too, not just you becoming a doctor?
I think that I'm trying to understand the question a little bit.
Yeah.
The way I'm seeing it is I think that studying psychology and also being in therapy, I think the thing that studying psychology did for me, I think it made me feel more intelligent than I think I ever did before. I think that even though I was someone who was really driven in school, I always felt like there was a certain way that you maybe had to be, especially with math or something like that.
Okay.
And when I started studying psychology, I think it really like improved my confidence. I don't know. But I also think that starting to kind of learn about the world, not just about myself, but also learn about certain psychological phenomenons, it made me realize that the behaviors that we engage in, they're not random, that they're actually coming from somewhere, that there's a real way that human behavior works, and there's a way to actually like predict it and study it. And I think for years I kind of felt like I was this very unique case that was crazy and kind of navigating the world in a certain way. And I think that studying psychology made me realize, no, like I'm actually just human.
Yeah.
And I think other sort of parts of NYU that I was able to be involved in, you know, I joined clubs, I joined a dance team. And I think being in therapy and also sort of building this part of my career and also building my passions, I think overall it was just really great for my growth.
That's incredible. And I would love to know also how that's maybe going through both therapy and, you know, the courses that you're going through, how your maybe interactions with people have changed. Because I think sometimes, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you meet someone that's like extremely rude, or you meet someone that has like has like a particular thing that's like, why is that person acting that way? And you know, years prior, I may not have understood it. I may have been like, why is this person just like, what's going on here? But now when you interact with people, because of sort of the wealth of knowledge that you build, do you maybe approach people differently in terms of how they're reacting, or maybe having more empathy, or how have you engaged with people differently now?
It's been very different. And I think sometimes to a fault. I think that sometimes I hold a bit too much compassion, and it's something that I'm trying to balance, because I think something that I've really subjected myself to based on the amount of compassion that I've had in the past couple of years is mistreatment at times. And I'm starting to sort of navigate it and figure that out. I think that now that I know that the reason that someone is acting in a certain way, there can be so much going on underneath the surface. I think it's allowed me to be kinder. It's allowed me to give a lot more second chances. I think that now, again, if someone is being rude, I can really not take it personally. And I think that one of the things when I was younger was everything did feel very personal, because developmentally we don't have the ability to be thinking about what that person is thinking, or they had a bad day. It's like, oh, I'm the problem. So I think that now if I'm having an interaction with someone, I can really remember that, no, that is not necessarily a personal thing. But I do think that sometimes, and I've actually noticed this with a lot of individuals who are studying psychology or who are going through their own sort of mental difficulties, is we can give a lot of compassion, maybe at times when we should be prioritizing ourselves. And I think something I'm really working on is how can I set these boundaries in which I am giving that amount of empathy, but I'm also protecting my own inner peace.
I love that. And so we talked about interacting with people. At a certain point, you are now interacting in some sense with thousands of people when you start public speaking. So I would say I would just love to learn about that journey, because it's one thing to have a conversation where we're just sitting on a couch. Let's say there's no mics here and we're just talking about our experiences. But to get up on stage in front of people you don't know in the slightest and talk about your experiences so vulnerably and try to be of some help in some regard, how do you even get to that process of doing that?
Yeah, it really has been one of the greatest joys of my life. I'm 27. I don't know why I'm like feeling like I'm 90 years old. I wasn't even planning to go into public speaking. I was looking for something to do between undergraduate and my graduate program. And I was on the career website just trying to look for positions. And I remember I saw, my company's name is called Minding Your Mind. And I saw Minding Your Mind, young adult public speakers, personal experience needed. And I'll never really be able to explain it, but there was just something in me that said, I have to do this. I had never thought about public speaking. It was never something that I really had a passion for. I've never taken a class on it. I just knew that I had to do it, and I knew that I had so much to share. And I felt like I was in a position in my life where I think I was capable of sharing it. And the application, it had 2 questions. It said, what's your story? And then why do you want to share it? The person got back to me the next day, and I started training. And it was funny. I was so nervous, and I think I was having some imposter syndrome. So every time they would send me an invite, I rejected it. And I just kept on making excuses. I'm sorry if my bosses are listening to this. I just kept making excuses like, no, I can't. And then I said, okay, the next one that I get, I'm going to say yes to. And I promised myself. I do this thing where I swear on myself. If I swear on myself, I have to do it.
Yeah.
And it was for 500 people. And it was 3 times that day. It was for 1,500 people total. But I had sworn on myself, so I had to say yes. So I went, and it was the most natural thing that I've ever done in my entire life.
Wow.
Actually, the time limit they told me was 45 minutes, and they actually said, you have 80 minutes. And I said, oh, wow, okay. And I just was talking, and it felt amazing. And after I spoke, I had 26th graders lined up to tell me about their own experiences and things that they're going through at home. And the woman at the end, she told me they've never had that many students come to guidance before.
Wow.
And I just knew that was something that I needed to do for as long as I could.
That is unbelievable. I would love to know what happened in that moment where you're so hesitant to go up on stage, and like you're just pushing it off. You finally get on stage. I'm so curious about the story that you craft for the audience, because in some sense how you articulate the information also makes a difference to whoever's in the audience to understand your story, but maybe be brave enough to share theirs or finally have the courage to speak up. What happened when you went on stage? Did you prep everything ahead of time, or so you prepped everything ahead of time?
They train you.
Okay,
they
gotcha. So did you go through, I would just love to learn about that process. Like, is there someone you're working with that like you walk through like a slide deck presentation of your story put together, or you're just framing it verbally? Like, what was the process like?
Absolutely. So the first thing that my boss asked me to do, he said, make a timeline of every single thing that has ever happened in your life. And I was like, oh,
how much time do we have?
Okay. And I think it took me 6 hours.
Yeah.
It was so many pages long, and it was hard. Things were coming up that I hadn't even remembered before. And it was supposed to be really just like a timeline of everything. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And then what you do is you really go through that timeline and you say, what are the themes here?
Yeah.
Like, what are the sort of messages? Because at the end of the day, you are giving a talk and there's a time limit, and you also want to present the information in a way that, the audience is going to listen to, and plus the age group. So you have to think about all that.
Yeah.
So it's really about what are the themes and what are you really trying to say? And for me, I think I wanted to talk about very specific things that had happened. When I was younger, the main thing was this perfectionism that I had learned to develop. And I think that perfectionism isn't something that a lot of us can really relate to.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about that. And then I wanted to talk about why it is so hard to be someone who seeks external validation but is also a perfectionist. Because if you're trying to be perfect all the time, but you view other people to define whether you're perfect or not, and they are always telling you you're not, you are in a really, really tough spot.
Yeah.
Really wanted to highlight that, and I really wanted to just talk about the journey that it takes to get to this point of suicidality, because it is not something that happens overnight.
Right.
This is something that takes months, days, years to sort of happen, and I really wanted to help people understand that. Because the other message there is then if you are getting treatment early on, you may not get to that point of suicidality, and the probability of that is so much less if you are getting that treatment early. And the main thing I wanted to highlight was that recovery is possible. Because again, if I had someone that like came into my school and told me you're not crazy, my story would have looked very different. And I really wanted to hone in on how that recovery was possible and things that I did, but also really that it was.
Yeah. And when you do your presentations, is there a portion where people are able to ask you questions?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just curious, what are common questions that you get across the board of it could be anything, whether it's someone who wants help or they're not sure how to navigate a particular issue. Are there common questions that usually come up?
So the most common one is, what's your Instagram? And
we'll tag it below.
And I go, next. So that's the most common one. Second most common one is, and actually there's a lot that I get that I think the more that I do this, I'm seeing. One is, if you could say something to your younger self, what would it be? One was, really about your family's role in it. A lot of them really want to understand more of that family role. And I think the downside is sometimes this time limit is there's so many things that I really can't include. But that's a big part of it. One is asking about how I got into speaking. One is asking about if I ever get depressed now, or if I ever get sad now and what that looks like. How you can help a friend. That's a really big one too. And I think a lot of times they just have questions about, like, it's very personal, that I wouldn't even really be able to say it, not because I don't want to, but because it's really tailored to them, and they'll come up to me afterwards a lot of the times and talk about their own personal experience. And that's the thing that happens very commonly, of something that they're going through at home, or the fact that they're seeing a guidance counselor right now and they've never told anyone about it. So those are really some of the main themes I think that I get.
I love that. And if you don't mind, if I could just dissect like one or two of those.
Sure.
So like when someone comes up to you and says like, hey, like maybe I know someone that wants to seek help, or how do I even get started? Like what general guidance do you maybe give in terms of like getting started in that process if they're not sure where to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing I always say is that you cannot help someone that does not want to be helped, because I think that we put so much pressure on ourselves to be there for someone who is struggling. And by definition, that person is struggling. So they're really not able to sort of see a lot of times what's right in front of them. And I think that we end up sometimes damaging or hurting ourselves in the process. And I really want to highlight that. Then I also say, one is just listening. I think that we really undervalue how much we just need to listen sometimes and not fix and not give advice, because that's the one thing that other people probably aren't doing for them. Everyone is trying to fix them and get them better. And at the end of the day, like, depression is coming from this sort of suppression of emotions. So if I can just talk about some of these things, that itself is going to make me feel so much lighter.
Wow.
I think another thing too is just spending time with that person. You know, I had a friend who would literally just come over and we wouldn't talk about what I was going through. They would just spend time with me. And that was so helpful, because sometimes it felt very unsafe to just be in my own space. So to have someone there. I also think that sometimes people who are feeling, you know, these feelings feel like they're the only ones that are experiencing it. So if you're also able to come in and be vulnerable, it really echoes other people to be vulnerable. And I also think I have a lot of answers for this.
Is great. Yeah.
I also think that sometimes even just like finding a therapist and going on Google and searching is very hard for people. So even if you say, hey, I found some in your area, I've done that for people and they've contacted them, or I contact them on their behalf. And I think things like that can be very, you know, it can feel very small and insignificant, but it's actually very, very significant for the person that's struggling.
What are some of maybe the common misconceptions or like the objections that you often come across? Like, I'm not sure if it happens in day-to-day life, or if it comes across in maybe your professional work, where parents came in and they may not be completely open to it, but they're just bringing their kid along to see if we're trying to help out. What are some common objections that you often have to overcome, or maybe something you have to explain to them so they better understand like the importance of having these discussions?
I think that a lot of parents, they feel like it's their fault. So the main thing that I really have to hone in on is, if your child is struggling, we need to get them treatment. At the same time, it may not be your fault. I think there's such a difference between blame and sort of acknowledgement. I'm not blaming you for the decisions that you've made, or maybe the way that you've been a parent, because at the end of the day, a lot of times parents really are just doing the best they can and the only thing they know how to do. But we also have to acknowledge that this did have an effect on your child. I think the other objections I receive are like, if you just snap out of it, if you just, you're being oversensitive, if you just kind of don't think about it, it's going to go away. And I really have to explain that years of trying not to think about it is what causes the depression. Right. Depress literally means to push down. And that is what someone has been doing for years. And so it's not working. And I think there's still going to be a lot of people who are very stuck on that mentality. And unfortunately, I have to accept that. But if I can really talk about, for me, what it did, and for what it does for so many people to actually start releasing these things, that it's not something that, you know, your emotions are not going to destroy you and sort of overtake you. It's actually going to help you manage them in the process.
Wow. And I would love to also learn about the reverberating effect of like, now that a child, or it could be your own personal experience of like, you're going through therapy, you're making these changes. for some parents that may start off and say like, why are they doing this? Or like, this isn't going to help, or like, we're just trying to fix things. But then at a certain point, I imagine like the impact almost pushes back on the parents sometimes, where like maybe they do gain a better understanding of like, now at this point, oh, I do understand that this was necessary to do. Have you seen some of those cases as well, of like parents beginning to finally understand, and maybe for them, like they're realizing things about themselves that they also never addressed?
I think my own parents are a great example of that. So my dad definitely did really struggle with a lot of anxiety, and seeing my journey was such an eye-opener for him to realize that he was also struggling with similar things. And I think that seeing me recover in the way I was able to, it really showed him, wow, like you can actually recover, and talking about this actually does help. And I did have such a monumental change from going to therapy.
Yeah.
And same with my mom. I think that she struggled with so much. And when she was actually able to start having a place to really talk about those things, and realizing that that is something that helped me and maybe it can also help them. So both of my parents are in therapy right now, and it's something that they're very open about. And it's something that I'm so ridiculously proud of them for, because I understand, like in the South Asian community, what a taboo that is. So to be able to sort of talk about it and embrace that they're a part of it is huge. It's honestly all that I could ever ask for. And I feel very grateful that my journey has had that value and has really led to that destigmatization.
I love that. And I would love to learn about the process of maybe how you're helping someone. It could be solve a problem, it could be learn something about themselves, it could be figure out a new tool to deal with anxiety or anything. What is, and this may be a very nuanced answer, but and different for each case, but like, what is the process of helping someone through something? Like, how do you navigate, I guess, the push and pull of you're explaining to someone, hey, like this is actually what's happening, etc., versus maybe asking them questions so they could probably potentially think about it themselves and maybe come to a conclusion? Is there a push and pull there, or like, how does it usually work?
Yeah. So like, as a, like, what would it look like in like a therapy session? Yeah. I think that, so I'm someone who really likes to explore. So I really try to ask a lot of questions of like, where did you learn that from? Where did you first learn that? What part of you is telling you that? Why are you choosing this explanation over this explanation? And these are questions, and they can seem very simple, but no one's really asked them that before.
Yeah.
And what I really try to do is kind of ask those questions and wait for the answers to kind of come up. And I say, this is not a test, but let's just sit here and kind of explore this. And people really start to realize like, I don't know actually why I think that way, because so many times the way that we think, we consider it to be a truth. And when you're actually able to start challenging it and exploring it a bit more, it almost loosens that of like, is this a truth, or is this just a message that I received for a very long time?
Yeah.
I think then is when I really start to implement the psychoeducation of this is actually something that a lot of people engage in, and this is something that a lot of people struggle with. And when you're able to start seeing it that way and realizing, oh, wait, maybe I don't need to always respond this way. Maybe I can be flexible in the way that I think about this. Maybe I don't have to feel this way all the time. I think that's when the change really starts to happen. And what I really try to do is remind people that this is something that takes a lot of time, but almost like little challenges every week. Like, can you, I don't know, like I have someone right now who is really struggling with being vulnerable with the person that she's seeing. So can you tell them they look nice today, right? That's something, it's so small, but that's something that's so difficult for someone to do. And the more that people engage in these activities that they feel are uncomfortable for them, but the more that they're actually realizing that the response they're getting is actually something that they like, it really reinforces for that person, like, oh, actually I can do this and it's safe for me to do this. Wow. But it's a process.
Yeah. And I imagine on a timeline perspective, because there's years and years that go into having these conversations, maybe unpacking things that someone have thought about a certain way for a decade, and now they're having these conversations with you. I would love to learn about the level of patience. So like when you get into the process of knowing like how long-term it can be, like how do you reinforce that for you, but then also maybe for anybody listening to this, knowing that like this is a longer term process for themselves to go through the patience to get through it? Like how important is the patience piece?
It is probably the most important part, because someone who struggles with perfectionism wants to do it perfectly, right? They want their treatment to go perfectly, and they want to win, and you can't. And I think that something I really, really try to emphasize is that your mind is something that is with you 24/7. you're thinking all the time.
Yeah.
So in order to start changing some of your thoughts and changing some of your behaviors that have resulted because of those thoughts, that takes a lot of time. I almost attribute, like, it's like playing the piano. Like, you're not going to be able to do it right away. You're going to fuck up, and you're going to have to, like, the keys are going to be different. It's like, it's really something that takes a lot of time. But what I really try to emphasize is how progress can look very, very small, but all progress is still progress.
Yeah.
I remember I used to self-harm. I'm very open about that. And I self-harmed 3 times one week. I've been doing that very constantly. And then I self-harmed twice one week. My therapist was like, that's progress. And I was like, it is? But like, it is, because it went from 3 to 2 to 1 to never. And it is those little steps that really make the difference. And I really try to highlight that for the person I'm seeing, as well as myself, that you are getting towards your goal, and all of these small things are very significant. And trying to kind of rush myself is truly, in a sense, doing the same thing that other people had been doing to me for so long. So if I'm going to do anything different, and if I'm going to have that self-compassion, I need to give myself time. And it actually feels really good now, I think, to do that. It feels like I'm taking care of myself and giving myself that patience that other people did not give me.
I love that. And I would love to also learn about the, I think there's a piece of it that you and I have probably been aware of on social media, where there's a lot of, more now than ever, discussions about mental health, et cetera, and people finally vocalizing either things that they've been through, et cetera. But I think there's also a piece of this, and this tends to happen with anything that becomes at least finally like publicly acceptable in some sense to talk about, where you have people either using it to, whether it's gain followers or talk about it a specific way, or even justify their actions sometimes, of like, hey, I'm able to do this because I'm dealing with this, et cetera. I would love to learn, especially from your perspective, having gone through so much school and learning about this, of your take on figuring out which people are actually looking for help versus those that are like maybe using it as a excuse for, I can act a certain way, or I can do whatever I want to do, if you feel comfortable like answering that.
It's a great question. The truth is, it's a gut feeling for me. I think that when I see an individual who is consistently posting about, loving your body and respecting yourself, but then you see that they're editing their photos and they're, over editing it, right? To the point where that that's maybe not something that they're really embodying. But for me, I think that you can tell if someone's genuine by the way that they word certain things. I don't know. For me, writing has always been a way of expressing myself. And I think that when someone really embodies what they say, you're drawn to it in a way that maybe you're not drawn in other ways. I also think that if you're someone who values and is talking about living in the moment, and then you're recording every single moment of your life, I'm sorry, but I think that's contradictory. I think that there are certain people who, if you're really doing the work, consistently posting about it and recording it and speaking about it in a way that it feels very simple, and that emotion is not there. For me, that's what I really dictate at surface level. And also, self-care is not a fucking bubble bath. Like, it's not. And that's the thing. It's like, oh, I'm taking care of myself. But it's like, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing I see too is I see so many people talking about their mental health journey, but they're not vulnerable about all the things that really got them there. Yeah. And I think that that's something I really try to embody, is that vulnerability of like, there's actually so much that happened. I'm not just telling you about the good and all these things that I embody. Like, I am really telling you about the journey. And I think that if you're someone that is trying to say you value authenticity, you have to be able to be fully authentic, and not just authentic in the parts that you think will get you views and likes.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. And I think one thing that we've noticed throughout this interview and me and my interactions with you is you're obviously very, very funny.
Thank you. I try. It's a coping skill.
And I'm so glad you said coping skill, because that's about where I was about to go. I was doing some research and readings, and I had talked to my own family has been through enough, and a lot of my family members are very funny. And I was like, there's probably a connection here of like your ability to sort of process information, be funny, etc. So I use that as a sticking point to ask. I would love to learn about maybe like unhealthy versus healthy coping mechanisms. Like, what is the distinction between the two of them? Are there distinctions? Like, how do you usually operate, navigating those worlds, both for your patients, but also like for yourself even?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So the best way that I differentiate a healthy coping skill versus an unhealthy one is short-term versus long-term relief. So a healthy coping skill, that is something that's going to make me feel good in the short term and in the long term. Honestly, maybe it'll be exhausting in the short term, maybe like something like dance, right? But in the long term, it's going to make me feel good. But coping skills such as substance use, such as self-harm, such as, external validation, those are things that in the short term, it feels like a high. And then in the long term, you're just seeking more and it's making you miserable and it's actually putting you into a much deeper hole. So that's the main way that I would really differentiate. And I think that coping skills, it's really about, what makes you feel good that's not hurting you in the process. And I also think it's also about balance, because a lot of times we're engaging in coping skills such as exercise, which I think is great, but we're overdoing it. We're not really respecting our bodies in the process. And I think that it's also about balance of, am I respecting my body by just sitting in my bed and eating potato chips all day long? No. But am I respecting my body if I'm on the Stairmaster for 5 hours? No. So I think there's really that middle ground. And if you're able to achieve balance and be doing something that is fueling your body that's not going to hurt you in the process, then that's a healthy coping skill.
That's incredible. So for you, when you first started, maybe you had your coping skills, were the majority of them, you think, unhealthy when you didn't have the exact tools, and then they eventually reverted back? And like, how have you noticed the difference in maybe how you handle situations now if you do deal with times where you're not feeling the greatest, you're dealing with anxiety, et cetera? Like, how are you now dealing with it better than you think you were dealing with it previously?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the biggest change was that before, when I was feeling sad or anxious, I felt like I needed to get rid of the feeling right away. And that's because I thought, sadness and anxiety, it's bad. And so I can't be feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? And it was in my efforts to try to get rid of it that I actually deepened it. So, when I was younger and I was feeling sad or anxious, I would immediately engage in an unhealthy coping skill because it's really all I knew. And that would be self-harm. It would be a lot of substance use. It would be sexual behavior. There were so many ways that I really tried to get rid of those feelings. And now that I am someone who knows that anxiety, it comes in waves, and it's not bad, it's not me, it's just the feeling that I'm having. I'm not my anxiety.
Right.
I'm feeling anxiety and I'm experiencing anxiety. I don't necessarily need to get rid of it as much, and so I don't feel that need to engage in a coping skill that is going to remove it right away. So whenever I'm starting to sort of feel that way, I ask myself, what can I do to take care of myself right now? Sometimes that is dance, sometimes that is a puzzle, sometimes that is singing or whatever the hell I want to do in that moment. Sometimes it's just doing nothing, though, and just allowing myself to cry and allowing myself to feel sad. And I think that now that I've really been able to embrace every emotion naturally, it's really changed sort of the up and down of it so much. It's really become a lot more leveled because I'm able to embrace it.
I would love to learn about sort of the expansion of trust. So like, you're dealing with making sure that internally you want to make sure that you're content and doing things that make you happy. But at a certain point, I mean, you've expanded your life to have close friends that you love and like a partner that you're with. And, how do you begin to expand trust, especially when you go from a starting point of like, it feels hard to trust anybody or talk to anybody without being judged in some sense?
Yeah. I mean, the first person that's coming up for me is my fiance, and I'm trying to...
Let's go, Joe.
Is that what you were going for?
Let's go, Joe.
Let's go, Joe. And I'm trying to really understand like how you do that.
Yeah.
I think that one part of it, and this is the hard part about being raised in a family where there is so much chaos, is you begin to think that the world is a bad place and everyone is out to hurt me.
Yeah.
And I think through therapy, when I was able to really unlearn that and realize, one, it's not like they actually wanted to hurt me, and two, not everyone is going to treat me this way.
Yeah.
I think it allowed me to take in love a bit more. And with someone like Joe, who gives love in a very, very pure way and in a very authentic way, I think that I really needed to start loving myself, because I didn't think that someone could actually love me the way that he does. And so I didn't trust him when he did give me that love. I felt like there was something that was wrong with him, that he could love someone like me in that way. And I think part of starting to trust other people is you need to have faith in yourself and trust in yourself and love for yourself.
Yeah.
And know that that's something that other people, maybe they don't want to hurt you.
Yeah.
And maybe they will be good to you. And I think it's also, again, I think it's just having faith sometimes. And I also think that I used to shield myself from people a lot of the times because I was so scared of being hurt. But now that I know that I am someone who is capable of handling those emotions, if someone does hurt me, I think I've allowed myself to be vulnerable a lot more because I know that if they do hurt me, I'll be okay. But I think that opening myself is worth it to feel love because I think I deserve to feel loved.
Yeah. I appreciate you answering that. And I think one thing that I also wanted to ask, and this is kind of a weird question, but
Sure.
is there anything in all the discourse that you've had around mental health, whether it's on stage, whether it's within your sessions, something that doesn't come up often publicly that probably should be discussed a lot more? Like, is there something that's generally overlooked, or maybe it's talked about maybe in your sessions, but publicly it's not really addressed, whether it's on social media, et cetera, regarding mental health that people should probably start paying attention to or maybe considering?
It's a great question. The first thing that came to mind, which then I'll go with, is depersonalization. So depersonalization, it really refers to this feeling of like, you don't really feel like you're in your body and everything feels really spacey. And the amount of times that I've heard people talk about that, about feeling spacey, I hear it all the time, and people don't really know what it is. And it's interesting because before COVID, no one ever used to ask me about that. I do mention in my talk once or twice, but no one ever used to ask me about that. And after COVID, they still don't a lot, but a couple more have. And I think that the reason I think it's important to talk about is because for a lot of people, depersonalization is one of the first sort of signs that you're struggling, because now it's your mind is so overwhelmed that it's almost like shutting down and it's feeling really foggy, and it's your mind's way of trying to protect you. And I think there's so many people that are like, oh yeah, I've just been feeling more spacey lately, but if we knew that that was actually a signal that maybe you should look at this, I think people would get help a lot sooner.
Wow, that's really good. And I think in terms of people getting help a lot sooner, have you noticed at all, it could be conversations that you're having with kids when you do these talks, but even just administrators or people that are actually in charge of these children at these schools, like, are people actually coming to you from that capacity of like, hey, how do we set up a system that's actually better for protecting our kids or understanding them, or maybe recognizing if something's going on, how to get them the appropriate help? Has anybody talked to you about that?
I think so. I think that's one of the amazing parts about why people hire Minding Your Mind is because they want students to understand that there's help out there and that they can ask, and that Minding Your Mind doesn't look like, or someone who's struggling with mental illness doesn't necessarily look like a crazy person, whatever they depict on TV, fucking Split or whatever other movies they have that are just like not accurate. And I think that when they're starting to sort of bring us into schools and bring mental health education into schools, that's their way of saying like, we need to talk about these things. And I think I do have a lot of teachers and counselors and parents are coming up to me and asking, okay, what can I do? Because this is what I've been doing and it's not working. How do I do this in a way that is good for the child, going to get them the help that they need, but also I'm not imposing? Like, people are actually having these conversations a lot more rather than being like, okay, we need to do something about you. It's kind of like, how do I do this in a way that is also respecting what you're going through, but is going to get you the help that you need? And I think that sort of people thinking about the nuances now means that they're really thinking about these things in a way that they did not before.
That's incredible. And this is also another weird question.
Sure, I like them.
It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, at 27 years of life, it feels like you probably lived 3 lifetimes at this time. And I feel similarly at 26 of just like, wow, I've already been through so much and overcome so much. But I wonder if you look at your life forward looking at any point. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of present work that you're doing and like you're considering like what you have to do now, et cetera. But I'm wondering if you look at the evolution of a decade, 2 decades from now, not just for yourself, but also for like the future of where mental health is going, whether it's discussions, whether it's treatments, whether it's just open conversations. Like, have you thought at all about maybe like the forward progress, or are you just focused for the most part on figuring out what's going on right now?
I think I'm more focused on that now because the truth is I don't really know where it's going to go. However, I do believe that the fact that we're talking about these things so much more, the fact that so many more people are in therapy, the fact that older generations are going to therapy, I know that there's a lot going on in the world right now. And I also really do have hope that we are moving forward in terms of mental health and in terms of, people getting help and actually realizing that this is something and this is not just in your head. This is not just random. This is an illness, and also there is treatment for it. I do believe that we're moving in the right direction. And I feel very honored to sort of be a part of that in helping move in that right direction.
I love that. And before I ask my last question, I also wanted to open the floor because there's only so much that I know in terms of like the research that I've done so far. But if there's anything at all that I missed that you think it would be worth bringing up about mental health, whether it's a question that like I should probably be asking or something that would be worth discussing or bringing up, it could be really broad based across anything. I would love to just open the floor to like things that should probably be discussed that I may not have brought up.
It's a great question. I don't know. I think you've been killing it. You're doing a really good job. Seriously. Yeah. So no, I think you've been doing, I'm not sure. I think maybe the thing that I would bring up, because I think that a lot of times people think when they're going to start going to therapy that it's going to be great right away. And that's something that I hear a lot, that I went to a therapist and I went for a session or two and it didn't work. And that's something that I think is really important to debunk, because one is no matter who you're going to, that first session is going to be hard because you haven't talked about these things. And now you are sharing them with a complete stranger. And at the end of the day, our minds are trying to protect us from some of these events. So when we're being asked about them, it is going to be really painful. I actually compare going to therapy like popping an ingrown hair. You know what I'm talking about? Like, cause it fucking hurts when you're like really right. And it's like, and it's a good one. It's a really good analogy. And I was popping one the other day and I was like, this is good. I'm going to use this. And like, you rub it and it hurts, but it's not too bad. And then you really squeeze it and it's so bad. And then you release. Right. And that's therapy. And I think that I wish a lot of people knew that sometimes you are going to feel worse before you get better, but you will get better and it is possible, and just give it time. And just, give yourself that time.
I love that. So I realized I did have one question before my last one.
Sure.
I would love to learn, like, if anybody's watching this and they're like, hey, I would love, like, this podcast has been a great start, but I would love to get some reading materials, or maybe like, is there something I could watch that you watch consistently that you consume that's helped you out a lot? That's a bit more public access. So like if there's books available or maybe speakers that et cetera, that would be good for people to check out, or you think would be great to just even know about if they wanted to start perusing, like, are there resources that you usually go to?
Yeah, so some of my favorites, my favorite, and I was telling you about this, my favorite psychologist, who's actually not technically a psychologist, who was a physician who realized there was a lot of connection between the mind and the body when he was seeing patients as a physician, who is now a trauma expert. I think that he has done his name is Gabor Mate. I think he's done an incredibly phenomenal job of helping people understand trauma in a way they did not before. And when I started reading his books, I felt so much lighter and I felt more in control of my life, because what he says trauma is not what happened to you, it's what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you. And in that way, trauma is not this event that is etched into history that I cannot change. It is something inside of me that I can actually work on and be released from. So I think that if you are someone who is struggling and maybe wants to understand a bit more, I think he's a great place to start. And I think he does a phenomenal job of speaking about things in a way that is really digestible to not only people in the mental health community, but just people who are struggling and want to learn more. Books that I think are really great. The Happiness Trap is one that is awesome. The Body Keeps the Score. The Art of Thinking Clearly. These are just random books, but I think that all of these really do a great job of helping maybe look at the mind in a way that, someone has not before.
Nice.
Yeah.
And for my final question, the podcast is called Improving Humans. And one of my favorite things to do is just ask people if there's an idea, a quote, or a concept that's helped them improve as a person, or something they hold near and dear to them. Is there something that you'd want to share with all of us?
Absolutely. So I think my answer to this is mindfulness. And mindfulness, all it means is just paying attention and being more aware. And for years, what was happening for me is when I was in a place, I wasn't actually there. I was either thinking about the past, about things that I could not change, or I was thinking about the future, about things that had not happened yet. And there was so much joy to be had in the moment that I was not experiencing. So when I started really practicing being mindful, and what that looked like was starting to pay attention to my thoughts, realizing when they were drifting, and starting to bring myself back, I felt so much more connected to everyone around me. I started actually smelling the things that were around me. I started really listening to the person in front of me. And I think it allowed me to just feel so much of the joy that had already been there, but I just wasn't able to experience it because my mind was not present.
Yeah.
And it has helped me so much with dance, of really feeling connected with my own body and not feeling the need to rush and to just be there. It's helped me with my patients because I can really listen to what they're saying and be very present rather than thinking about what I should be saying next. But I think it's just allowed me to feel really good in the life that I have right now. And that's given me, I think, a greater amount of happiness than anything ever could.
That is a perfect way to end it. I seriously cannot thank you enough for the time today. I'm so glad we got to sit down. I'm so glad we got to meet before this,
Yes.
But I'm so glad we got to have a sit down and have a conversation. And hopefully this is a conversation that's going to continue for a lot more people moving forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.